Good day, everyone. My name is Howard Coombs, and I am the Deputy Director of CIDP. And today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Eleanor Taylor as our speaker. Eleanor is a native of Antigonish, Nova Scotia, who completed 25 years as an infantry officer of the Royal Canadian Regiment, and now runs Eleanor Taylor Consulting, a company that supports the development teams and leaders who thrive in adversity. While in uniform, she had many rewarding experiences at home and abroad. Chief amongst them was her deployment to Kandahar, Afghanistan, during which she led operations with soldiers from the Canadian, United States, and Afghan armies, and her work with Special Operations Command, developing interagency partnerships. Eleanor has been asked to share her experiences on women in combat and the integration of women in non-traditional trades with academics and armed forces of other nations who are studying the issues. In 2013, she was named by the Women's Executive Network as one of Canada's top 100 women. In 2019, she was invested into the Order of Military Merit, which recognizes exceptional service. She also has received the Meritorious Service Medal for her combat leadership in Afghanistan. Eleanor lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia with her children, Isaac and Beth. She is passionate about projects in support of veterans' wellness and women in leadership. And on a personal note, I'd like to say it's a great privilege to introduce Eleanor today, and she is a former graduate of RMC. Now today, Eleanor is going to present, and at the end of her presentation, I ask that any questions you have, you post the Q&A section of your screen. And you can post those questions throughout the presentation as they come out. They will be sorted and collated by our very talented intern, Tom Turmel, and he will provide them to me at the question and answer period so that those questions can be answered. So without further ado, I hand this over to Eleanor.
So thank you so much, Howard, for that kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be with everybody here today. I want to start out this presentation by saying that this is not about accolades. We remain in a crisis. We still have a significant number of deserving Afghans. In fact, the majority of the Afghans who we are tracking are not yet through the evacuation process. And so if at the end of this presentation, the conclusion that anybody had was that we need to pat ourselves on the back, well, I will have failed in my objective. But what I can tell you is that being part of the veterans advocacy effort and all of our partners who are engaged in this advocacy effort has been an inspiring experience for me. It has allowed me to bring my best self to the table because I've been watching so many other people who care so deeply about this issue bring their best selves to the table every single day. So what I'd like to do is share with you a little bit about how this group has come together to some extent to allow you to see yourself in it, because I'm quite confident that in the audience today there are a lot of people who have personally or within their organizations have been advocating. So to help you see where you fit in the bigger picture, and that it serves as a motivating feature for you to allow us to continue to do this really important work. So how did it begin? I'll tell you from my perspective, I was woefully ignorant of the state of our the people who supported us during our mission in Afghanistan. I was not aware that we had not already evacuated the majority of the people who had worked with us. And so it was only in June of this year when I started to see my colleagues, my friends, people that I had served with, and people I didn't know, presenting themselves in a really passionate way in the news media, or tweeting, or conveying on social media the urgency of the situation. And so for me, it was watching people like Dave Morrow, like Wendy Long, who began the Afghan Canadian Interpreters Organization 5 years ago, identified this as a problem and began to develop a high quality list with her team. I looked at people like Corey Shelson, who I'd served with on Task Force 110, making the passionate plea for our brothers and sisters still in Afghanistan. and people I didn't know well, but I'd heard of, folks like Robin Rickards, who I understood was supporting the movement of some people from different parts of Afghanistan so that they could start to take advantage of the then unknown, then undefined evacuation options that the government of Canada might provide. And finally, Paul Carroll, a dear friend, had become involved. And it was because of him that I personally signed up and said, I want to help, because I had been doing, like I'm sure most of you had been doing, reaching out to the interpreters that we still knew in Afghanistan, consolidating my own lists, trying to support applications as best as I could, but really not knowing how to help in any unified way. And so that's how it began. And I'm sure it began similarly for a lot of you. And then I saw the open letter that retired Major General Dean Milner, Dave Fraser, and Dennis Thompson had put out in the media, really calling folks to action, demonstrating that there was a moral imperative for us to act. And I think collectively that was a wonderful thing for us to see, that senior level engagement direct with the government of Canada, but also available for all of us to see, to remind us how important this issue was and what our responsibilities were. And at that moment, you started to see advocacy groups who cared deeply about the issue popping up all over the place. You'd see individual veterans who were reaching out to see how they could help, engaging with the media, engaging with the political arm. You saw organizations like Not Left Behind, started by Kate and Andrew Rusk, the sister and brother-in-law of Nicola Goddard, who was killed in Afghanistan in 2006, starting to do some really important advocacy on this work. And you also saw a lot of serving members who care deeply about people in Afghanistan, trying to figure out how they also could support this effort. At this time, we saw two organizations emerge to support the fundraising effort. So True Patriot Love stood up and said, we want to be the fundraising vehicle for resettlement here in Canada, and commenced on a fundraising drive for that. And at the same time, just shortly afterwards, a Veterans Transition Network figured out the gargantuan task of how to leverage their organization to be the fundraising vehicle for operations in Afghanistan in support of the evacuation. And those two organizations together allowed Canadians to donate in the way that they felt they most wanted to support the operation. And really, those two organizations have been enormous enablers for all the work that has been done collectively. Also, just want to make a shout out to Treble Vector Group, who used their network to help find some fantastic volunteers who either worked on their own or as part of the network that I will describe to you. So then a team evolved, it emerged. We called it first Task Force Nebulous. Actually, we called it first Task Force Hodgepodge. And then we called it Task Force Nebulous. And then we changed the name to Afghan Strategic Evacuation Team because it reads a little better on documents that might be going outside of the organization. And this team of people, which included the retired generals and the leaders from each of the organizations listed on this slide, started to meet twice daily to try to figure out how to best engage with government to affect the evacuation, and how to fundraise to make sure that we could collectively afford to do the work that we were doing in Afghanistan. And it was here where I realized that there are a lot of veterans out there who don't wear a uniform. There are a lot of people out there who are invested, committed to this mission, the mission of the evacuation, and to our former mission in Afghanistan, who again don't wear a uniform. These people who served in Afghanistan with various people for various reasons on behalf of the Government of Canada. So specifically, I want to talk about Building Markets, who delivered Government of Canada programming to build sustainable peace in Afghanistan and build markets there for 20 years. And I just want to note that not one of the people who worked with them, although they meet the Government of Canada criteria for an enduring relationship with Canada, have made it through the application process. I want to highlight Journalists for Human Rights who joined us in this team, who too, with the support of the interpreters and the fixers that they worked with in Afghanistan, brought the story of our contribution in Afghanistan to the tables of Canadian families every single day. And this is a fiercely tenacious, motivated group to support those folks who supported them and to support the journalists who are at high risk in Afghanistan. And I'd also like to say that there has been a fraction of journalists who have been evacuated who are being tracked by that organization. And so there are a lot of people who have come to the table to represent the range of interests that are held by all Canadians to get these folks out. Another organization who we've not yet talked about is Raven Ray Resources, an organization set up by David Lavery inside of Afghanistan. And it was Dave Lavery, Canadian Dave, for those of you who have seen the W5 program, who was a huge enabler to our overall evacuation efforts and single-handedly pulled people out of the sewage ditch at the Barron Gate for days and days and days, in some cases when Canadians were not yet on the ground, or after when they were not yet on the ground. And Dave and his team in Afghanistan have been an enormous contributor to what it is that we are doing. And finally, the organization which I am now acting as Chief of Staff for, Amin Laura, which we'll talk about a little bit more, is an organization that really started in July and is stood up, became an NGO, and is enabling both accommodations, application support, communications, and evacuation in Afghanistan. And so together, this team has been able to do some remarkable advocacy and operational work. So I'll talk just a little bit more about Amin Laura, because I'm intimately involved now with how that organization works. And I think some of you may be interested to know that this is truly a combined team. There are more Afghan Canadians or Afghans who are on this team right now than there are veterans. And so this organization has a team of Afghans in Afghanistan who are enabling operations, evacuations, accommodations. It has a Canadian team made up of recently evacuated Afghans and also Afghan Canadians who've been resettled here for about 10 years and who are now Canadian citizens, who are driving operations, communicating with applicants every single day, and really helping us understand the needs of the applicant population. And it's a real privilege to be part of this team. As part of our work, we have also become exposed to all sorts of other partners in this operation, and some have been at this table for much, much longer than we have. The Afghan Women's Organization have partnered with us in the collection of data, as have Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. We've recently developed an initial relationship with the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, and I know that relationship is going to broaden and deepen. Unifor, who represent the journalists in Afghanistan, and partnered with Journalists for Human Rights, and also a group that represented by the Association of Ontario Midwives, who represent a group called the Forgotten Families. These are the families of some people who had immigrated to Canada between 2 and 4 years ago, and they don't have anybody advocating for them. They're separated from their families, and they need support to get here to Canada. And really what is important about this is just to recognize the depth of this advocacy work and the significance of the range of relationships. And what we, I believe, as veterans have been able to bring to the table is our ability to group and regroup and provide an organizational structure, which I have observed has been tremendously powerful and welcome to all of these other organizations who are doing equally important work. So I'm not, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to get too much into the fundraising update, but I will talk a little bit about this piece. So one of the things we realized early in the advocacy effort, as different organizations were coming together, and we had veterans and Canadian citizens, all who cared about Afghans who were stuck in Afghanistan, everybody was emailing everybody they knew who might be able to add a name to a list. Now, ACI, Afghan Canadian Interpreters, had developed a very high quality list, and they were sharing their list with the Strategic Joint Staff of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that was a way by which people were being vetted. But it became clear that the consolidation of this information and the ability to keep it up to date to enable evacuations and to enable advocacy was a critical gap. How could we possibly successfully evacuate people if we didn't know what their status of evacuation was? We also knew that IRCC, due to privacy constraints, were unable to share that information with us. And so we were really feeling a bit, to be honest, quite paralyzed in our ability to advocate for them in the absence of this information. And so, again, Paul Carroll, with some contacts that he had within IBM, reached out to them. And they provided us with a team and developed an end-to-end solution for us. And this end-to-end solution allows applicants to update their own information and keep it up to date, upload documents, so upload a copy of their facilitation letter, which is a document that they need in order to be evacuated, update copies of passports if they have them, upload all of that information into a secure database. And this has been really for us a game changer. And we have shared this application with all of our partners who are interested, so we can have a single source of truth to advocate both to government and to enable operations on the ground. And so this data allows us to do things like slice and dice the information that we have in a way that it means something. So, just illustratively, and we don't need to spend a lot of time here, but there are about 10,000 names that are now in this database of people who are meet the Government of Canada criteria for evacuation under one of the 3 programs that exist out there. And so there are those that fall in the special immigration measures, those with a significant and enduring relationship with Canada. There are those vulnerable, those people who fall into the high risk category who are also of interest to Canada. The journalists, the human rights advocates, the women leaders, the LGBTQ, the persecuted minorities. There are those folks that are outside of Afghanistan who fall neatly into the government program. And then there are those that are still in Afghanistan who are at very high risk, who are important to be captured too, because we believe they deserve a path out as well. And then there is the category which some of you may be advocating for, the families of the formerly resettled interpreters who came to Canada between 2009 and 2011. And so this data allows us to kind of get a sense of who has made an application, understanding that the vulnerable population doesn't have a clear pathway into a Government of Canada application yet, that's something they're waiting for. But nonetheless, they still registered with us and said, yes, we want to be counted. And so these are the people we have currently counted. We also are able to break them down by what category they fall into. So locally employed contractors, the interpreters, Canadian NGOs who make up a significant portion of the population, and then all the way down to some of the other of the people who fall into the other categories, some of whose names are not fully up to date because we're in the middle of that transition. So I think we're going to see the number of journalists increase. I know the number of women leaders are going to increase, and certainly persecuted religious minorities, because we have just joined forces with the Hazara Society. They will also increase. But this gives us a clear picture that we can use to advocate. We are also able to use this data to support our evacuation efforts. And I think it's important for us all to understand that of the 10,000 people who we currently have in our system, 80% of them have applications that are still in process. So that ranges from people who sent their initial email to IRCC to that inbox and maybe didn't receive a response, all the way to those who have made it to the stage of G number, for those who are in the special immigration measures category, but have not yet been provided with travel documentation. And I think for our understanding of our collective success, it's really important to recognize that 80% of the people we're talking about have applications in, but don't have travel documentation. So of those remaining folks, 10% are actually have applications approved and they're awaiting the appropriate travel documentation. And then 10% haven't submitted their application because they know there is no application gateway for them. So these would be those folks who fall in the vulnerable category, who just have said, okay, there's no application process yet. I'm not going to bother sending that email to IRCC. So we have a long way to go in order to get those deserving people who are at significant risk out and to Canada. But, you know, we have done things like this in Canada before. We have evacuated 40,000 refugees in a short period of time. And so this is not an impossible task, but the data allows us to understand the task. Another thing that I think is a bit inspiring is some of the entrepreneurial spirit that emerged as a result of this effort. So we have had people, you know, we showed you the database that was created by, you know, a benevolent technology organization or company. And then what you see in front of you is a product that was generated by 44 North, a company owned by Corey Shelson. And this product allowed us during the air evacuation to get a really clear understanding of where the Taliban checkpoints were. And so we used that as we were trying to communicate with the applicants about where to go and where not to go. He also developed a way by which we could track families and their movement to the airport. You know, and so up here you see, for those of you who are involved in some of the air evacuation efforts, this is the Northwest Gate, where all of our applicants were for 2 days kind of stuck at a gas station, hoping to get into that gate. Down here, this cluster, you see, this is the Barron Gate, what you would have seen on the news. You know, you see these families clustered there in hopes of being evacuated. And, you know, here, I'll just draw your attention to the right-hand side of the screen. Over here, you see the path of one single family as they tried to make their way out during the evacuation, the air evacuation. This is a family that moved back and forth to the airport and then around multiple gates, pinging us 96 times, demonstrating how desperately they wanted support. And eventually, this family did actually make it out, unlike most of the families that we were tracking. We've also been involved in some of the substantial media efforts to capture the reality facing people on the ground and the complexity that they're facing, both in the air evacuation and now in this period of time where they wait for their application to be approved. And here you see a picture of Canadian Dave, you know, that person who pulled multiple folks out of the irrigation ditch, and the reunion that he facilitated with this family well known to Lisa LaFlamme. So the next thing I just want to talk about quickly is, you know, the fact that this organization collectively is providing shelter, food, and life support for a significant number of the folks, those 10,000 folks on our list. You know, some of them in guest housing in various places in Afghanistan, some of them in private accommodations. But we, what we do is we keep track of them, we support them where necessary. And I think important for us all to remember that a lot of people, you know, were invited to come to Kabul to conduct biometrics and appointments to set the conditions for an evacuation that they were not able to take advantage of. And in leaving their home provinces, they identified themselves. And so they can't go back. And so they're stuck in hopes of Canada coming good on the promise that we made to them, that we would find a way to bring them here. And so one of the things that we have been doing is we have been, when people have made it through that IRCC process, we have mustered them and enabled their ground evacuation. And we have now moved almost 300 people through ground evacuation options, supported by Raven Ray, Canadian Dave, and of course coordinated by Em and Laura. And so in closing, I just want to remind you that this advocacy effort has been nothing short of remarkable. Canadians from coast to coast have engaged in this, and they've brought their absolute best selves to the table. Some people have quit their jobs in order to be part of this effort. Many people have worked 2 jobs effectively through the night on this effort and then going to work the next day. But I also need to remind you that only a fraction of the people who meet the criteria for evacuation have indeed been evacuated. So we have a lot of work left to do. We have a lot of advocacy work left to do, and then we have a lot of physical work to do to get folks out. And finally, we have a lot of fundraising to do to make sure that the work that we are doing remains affordable. You know, we look forward to working with government to see a more rapid evacuation process, to ensuring that we can keep people safe while they're waiting for their paperwork to be processed, and that we can get that paperwork processed at a more rapid rate. And some of the tools that I showed you here today will be a way by which we can continue with that advocacy. I want to make the note that we are seeing positive interactions with government, and that there is substantial interest in improving what has sometimes been insufficient to need. And so in closing, I just would like to say that you all can help. You can help in various ways. You can help by donating. You can help by volunteering. And I've got there a way by which we can have your names as volunteers. And you can help in the resettlement of folks when they arrive here. And there's a whole separate volunteer advocacy piece that has unfolded around that you know we can talk about in the questions if you're interested in. But I want to thank you for coming here today, for your interest in this effort, because not only is it of dire importance, but it is representing, I think, some of the best of what it means to be Canadian. So thank you.
Eleanor, I greatly appreciate your comments and thank you for the perspective, the informed perspective that you're providing everybody. So now I've opened the floor for questions. And while Tom collates anything that may arise in the Q&A, I'm going to ask the first question. I'll take my prerogative. So I don't know if you've caught it, but in the Globe and Mail yesterday, there was an article on the conditions at a safe house in Kabul for Afghans associated with Canada who have been trying to get out. And for those who haven't read the article, which I assume is quite a few of you, it's there's about 100 Afghans families that are in this safe house and they're stuck there. They're confined. So my question to you is, does that kind of mirror what's happening at the safe houses in Kabul right now? And what is the prognosis, at least in the short term, for the people trapped in these locations?
Yes, so I guess I want to make a couple of things clear. One is, of course, they're trapped because of the security situation in Afghanistan. They're not trapped in any of those guest houses. Nobody is preventing anybody from leaving. And I want to make it really clear that we always tell the applicants that the decision about what to do is entirely theirs. And sometimes they're getting advice from the government of Canada that doesn't jive with what their own assessment is of the risk on the ground. And so in those cases, we encourage them, you're there on the ground, you need to make the best decision for yourself. Certainly, collectively, and Em and Laura specifically, is accommodating a significant number of Afghans. And, those people are generally the most highly documented because they have had the support of those guest houses through the application process. They've been enabled with internet and application support. And so it, in many cases, from those locations that evacuation efforts commence, right? So as convoys are being planned, where those guest house locations are important in the planning for it. So, what is the prognosis for them? To answer your question specifically, the prognosis is we need to get them out of there. We need to get them evacuated so they can move onward to safety. Remaining in guest houses is not a great option. It just happens to be their only option. And we collectively are supporting that financially.
If I can indulge you and ask a follow-on. So how because to me, this is, it's a government of Canada issue. So how do we, as at the grassroots level, exert pressure on the government of Canada to engage in Afghanistan? Because it seems to have dropped off the news. It doesn't seem to be a political issue for any of the parties right now. So how do we affect the positive outcome here?
Well, I think one of the things is that we need to keep it on the radar. We need to continue to make it an issue. We need to continue to get in the news. And one of the things that is hopeful or positive is that, our Canadian media community is invested in this story. And so if anybody has a story that they want to tell because they have, someone that they know in Afghanistan and they've got a compelling story to tell, there's a very good chance that Canadian media is going to pick it up because they're invested in this story too. What we have found is that in the absence of pressure, we have not seen a great Government of Canada response on this issue. But with pressure, we have seen some substantial movements. Again, not always sufficient, but consistent and in the right direction. And so, we've recently been in some discussions that seem very positive. And so we're hoping to see some changes. But collectively, I think we absolutely need to remain engaged with our MPs, take opportunities to highlight this to the media, and where possible to fundraise, to fill the gaps, because there's a heck of a lot of gaps in terms of what might eventually be funded publicly and what will need to be funded privately.
Okay, and I thank you for that. I struggle with this occasionally because I'm trying to figure out from a personal perspective, how to push down on those levers of power. And I think you've offered some sage counsel. I think myself and others feel pretty much the same way you do. We're just trying to figure out how do we exert that pressure. Now, from one of the questions I've just received, it's a question: how do you think the government of Canada, what they've done to prevent this crisis, and what kind of planning could have been done to mitigate the suboptimal, I'm translating this a little bit, suboptimal outcome of what happened?
So a couple things. Of course, this was not a surprise. This outcome was not a surprise. We knew quite a long time ago that this evacuation effort would be necessary, and so some preparation would have made a big difference. Second of all, the mechanism that the government of Canada chose to evacuate the majority of the population that we are seeing right now, that is the use of the IRCC application process that required the downloading of forms on Adobe Acrobat and then printing and uploading of those forms. When the conditions were not set for that kind of application to be successful, I think was short-sighted. There were other options available to them that have been used in other evacuations, arguably laissez-passer, which is a travel document, a singular travel document, might have been used to allow people to move more rapidly, or to simply to allow us to accept the risk in a third location. So to just group people and move them rapidly, either across a land border or across a with aircraft, to enable their processing in a third location before their onward movement to Canada, or their processing in Canada before allowing them to remain. There are always disadvantages with doing that. The government has to accept a certain degree of risk. But when you consider the risk that these people are personally exposed to, it seems like a pretty minimal risk, and the degree to which Canada cares about them. So a less cumbersome IRCC approval process or application process, a more streamlined approval process, and then the global affairs piece setting the condition for processing in a third location or in Canada, I think could have alleviated the depth of this crisis.
As a follow-on to that question, are these difficulties still mirrored in what's ongoing?
They are not resolved yet. We are hopeful that they will be resolved.
Okay, thank you. Another question. It's from somebody affiliated with the Royal Military College. How has your military experience helped you in your current endeavor? And what are the lessons from this experience you would like to pass on to aspiring junior officers?
Yes.
Which you were one once.
Indeed, I was. It doesn't feel like that long ago. Yes, I mean, I feel like I'm back on an operation, honestly, from my basement. It's so that the lessons that I learned on operations have been directly applicable. Honestly, it feels as though all of us who have been part of this effort in a substantial way are doing those things we were expected to do in theater, be agile, consider outside of the box solutions, understand what the broader intent is, and then move towards that intent, expecting significant obstacles. And all of these things have proven to be the reality. So it has been, for me, having been out of operations for some time, really exciting to be back and part of that again for such a meaningful cause. And one of the things that I have really learned, and I continue to learn throughout my development, but is just the amazing contributors that are out there who are outside of our organization. So outside of the veteran community, which has been remarkable, but those people who have come to this fight from outside organizations and all the value that they bring in our advocacy effort and in an understanding of how to operate in this environment.
Okay, and I guess I will ask a follow-on to that. So now casting your mind back to when you were at RMC, what do you think RMC provided for you in terms of those tools? Did your experience assist you in directly with what's going on now?
I mean, I think my experience, what was relevant about my experience at RMC that I brought with me to this is, leveraging my peers, seeing the strengths of people around you and leaning on them when you need them. And that's what we have all been doing in this, is like people have emerged with strength that has been remarkable. And there are other times when we have to take a knee because we're just exhausted or something is happening. And so those are things you learn at RMC, to count on each other and to leverage each other, that I think have assisted me.
Okay, we've received, and I have another question that was in the Q&A, Thomas, because if you're checking for it. It's more of a directed question for somebody who's very invested with what's going on in Afghanistan time. It starts off with a thank you. And the question revolves around the individual has some family in Afghanistan in regards to escaping or making the journey to bordering countries, Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan, to apply to come to Canada. What are the options that you think they have available to them to make that journey? And is it safe to make that journey?
I guess there's quite a few follow-on questions that I would ask before I feel like I could offer any kind of advice. Sort of the questions that I would ask is, are they eligible to come to Canada? Have they started the application process? If they have started and they are sort of down the path, do they have a G number? If they have a G number, we have got every reason to believe they're going to be accepted. If they don't have a G number, then they're not eligible, we're kind of in a different space. We have spent quite a bit of time focusing on Pakistan as a nation because there have been support set up for onward movements of Canadian applicants to Canada. And so we could offer some detailed insight about movement to that country, although I wouldn't really want to do it in this forum. But if you would like to pass on my contact information to that person, I'd be happy to respond more fully.
Okay, so yes, I can do that. So if anybody is looking for Lieutenant Colonel Taylor's contact information, contact me at howard.coombs@queensu.ca. howard.coombs@queensu.ca. Okay, I have something in the chat I'm going to share you because you can't see it. And it's from Helen Hawes, who's an officer cadet at RMC. And I believe that she is, based on what she says in the chat, she is a university training plan non-commissioned members. Ma'am, I watched you in command at Troops in Contact at the gates of Spirangar when I was the only woman serving with the Operational Mentoring and Liaison team out of FOB Mazumdar. You are so incredible. And then when you quit, your letter was amazing. And she signs Officer Cadet Helen Hawes, MMMCD.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I echo those sentiments, as I do recall I overlapped with you as well. And I think I said something along the lines was, you didn't need to be in the middle of every tick that actually happened during the tour. Anyway, it was so good to see it wasn't just me who was seeing the same thing. Another question is, can you comment on the challenges that the Afghan families will face when considering their resettling in Canada?
I'm not an expert in this space, so I don't want to presume to be. What I can say is that these people have faced significant trauma. If you only consider the evacuation effort, if you only consider what they had to go through to try to make the air evacuation, the multiple attempts to make it to Bering Gate, the Taliban checkpoints, the communications that were so disjointed, the fact that many of them had to make the decision around should I try to take my family, my babies, my elderly down through this odyssey to possibly be evacuated, or should I not? Like all of these decisions are trauma inducing. On top of that, you just overlay, the reality of their experience and the Taliban takeover and sort of the loss of hope around their homeland. And you can imagine that folks are coming here not only in sort of physically and financially destitute, but with a significant journey from a mental health perspective to return to health. So all I can say, clearly not an expert, is that we need to wrap our arms around these people, bring them into our communities, and offer every support that we can.
Another question is, there's, I'm paraphrasing, but there is a great deal of perspectives on what's actually happening with the Taliban vis-a-vis the Afghans who are trying to immigrate. What is your understanding of how the Taliban are treating these Afghans at this point in time?
So there are mixed responses. Our experience has been that fully documented people are being enabled to pass. So, we have been moving fully documented people. We have communicated, those lists of people, and we have had success enabled by, Dave Lavery and his team of Raven Ray to kind of pass through those checkpoints unmolested. We have also seen clearly an effort to be perceived as legitimate occurring in Kabul, but that not being mirrored in every part of Afghanistan. There are, in parts of Afghanistan, you get the reports of the brutality that we are also aware of. And we've also had some very frightening reports that interpreters and other people who worked with Canada are being summoned to register and to have their names registered all over Afghanistan, which doesn't bode well, for them or their families. And so while there is what we think is a relative calm, we think the window on that calm is also closing. As the security situation overall in Afghanistan starts to degrade, and and we see these indicators of people starting to be counted, we believe the window for evacuation is closing, and there's urgency to action.
Okay, and I've just checked our chat, and we've, before I do the closing soliloquy, I want to make sure if anybody has any last questions, this is your opportunity to ask them. And, normally I would look for the pilot in the crowd, and when their lips stop moving, I'd be able to move on. But since I can't see that because it's just two of us looking at each other, I can't see anything coming up in the chat. So, Eleanor, I want to thank you on a number of different levels today. This is a topic that many Canadians are invested in, regardless of how the government of Canada is embracing the challenges right now. I think Canadians see this as a Canadian issue and needs to be resolved. It's great hearing what you and all those folks that are part of the team that is working with you and others are doing to help the people that helped us get to Afghanistan, or get out of Afghanistan into Canada. And the ongoing efforts to ensure that the majority of them who are still in Afghanistan have some hope to reach safety. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to come here today and talk to us about this incredibly important issue. And I hope that we'll have more opportunities to engage with you and CIDP down the road.
Howard, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for bringing the attention, not only in this, but also in some of your writings that I've very much enjoyed.
Thank you. Well, have a great day in Nova Scotia, and everybody, take care.